Thanks. I think whether like coast to coast, whether it's St. John's, Newfoundland, Scarborough, Ontario, Vancouver, BC, we know that the issues that like young Canadians are like voting with and care about are climate change, it's affordability, it's job security, because more and more we're seeing students graduating out with piles of student debt, but they're entering a really precarious workforce with contract jobs, with no benefits, often in communities far from our own. So these are really the issues that we're hearing about on the ground, and I think the issues that young people will be bringing into the ballot box.
Great, thanks. I'm just going to pause and say, so I've seen that a few folks are with us now. Thank you so much for following us to the Zoom. And folks are starting to post in the chat. So yes, please do post in the chat, tell us your questions, share links to some of what you're up to across the country, and we'll be sure to continue sharing those as in the next few days as the panel wraps up. Okay, that's really interesting to hear, Steph. So you're seeing that people are really impassioned about a variety of issues and thinking about the ways in which they're connected. And I think that's actually a bit different than how we hear about these issues in the media or as they're spoken about by politicians. We don't often see those links being made between the affordability challenges, climate change. Do you think that in making those kinds of links, the young people that you're speaking to are seeing their concerns and what they are wanting to wanting parties and leaders to take action on reflected in platforms and the kind of speaking notes of those leaders?
Yeah, so I think you like made some excellent points there on like we know that these issues can't be addressed in silos. We need a really like holistic approach to get to the bottom of solving the climate crisis, to making Canada a more affordable place for all generations. I think for the policy and platforms that students are reading, for so long, we have seen like millennials and Gen Z like X'd out of platforms and policy. Politics has never really worked for my generation, in that politicians aren't taking action on the issues that we care about. And we're at a point in Canada now that millennials and Gen Z have a mountain of issues on us. I would hope to see, honestly, more youth issues around like housing, around climate change, around better access to education, like deeper in parties' policies. But I think this election is really the first step to changing that narrative in Canada. Now that millennials and Gen Z are the largest voting bloc, we know we have a lot of power. And if any politician wants to be elected or re-elected, they need to strengthen their policies with more intergenerational solutions in them.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I'm curious, given this feeling that these concerns haven't quite been addressed in the past in Canadian politics, and that we're perhaps not seeing that even adequately reflected in some of the policy positions that parties are putting forward during this election, how do you think young people are going to show up in this election? What do you think's on the line?
Yeah, I think truly in being on the ground at like Conestoga College, Memorial University, in like St. John's, Saskatoon University, they like students realize how much they have at stake in this election. We've seen a lot of like failure across all parties on like delivering solutions. And I think what young people are really looking for and really inspired by are honestly results. I think we want like young people, I think we're calling on our politicians to like step out of smear campaigns, step out of controversies, and actually to like step towards like results on the issues that we're burdened by. Yeah.
Thanks, Steph. I hear that. I think there's a really strong call to action coming from doctors as well and healthcare providers that CAPE have been in touch with. So on that note, I think, yeah, I'm going to pull Edward in. Hey, Edward. Um, so maybe I want to chat a little bit more about what CAPE has been up to specifically, but I wonder if you have a response to what Steph has been sharing as in terms of what kind of issues are rising to the top for political parties in this election and the kind of action that you're looking for.
Yeah, thanks, Kat, and really happy to be joining on behalf of CAPE. First, I want to say that hearing from Steph is actually one of the things that is giving me hope. Seeing that young people are so engaged, including our students and health professionals of the future. And we often hear that young people aren't engaged, that they don't vote. But last month we saw hundreds of thousands of Canadian youth stand up for what they believe, and I'm hearing this inspiring vision from Steph. So that is, it's really motivating for me. And in terms of physicians, I just want to, what was the second part of the question again? I forgot that.
Yeah, just asking. So Steph was just sharing with us like what the folks she's speaking to are expecting from politicians and what maybe they haven't been quite seeing so far. And so I'm curious what the folks that you're speaking to are expecting politicians to deliver on.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of polling of Canadians, and consistently what comes out on top is health. And then what Steph also said is that this is a new narrative that's built for this election, that we also care deeply about climate change. And we're seeing that the two of those are intricately linked. And so what we talk about, what we hear from healthcare providers and health professionals is that climate change isn't just an environmental issue or an economic issue. It also impacts the health of Canadians. And so I have to thank Kim Parada. She's our Senior Director of Climate Change and Health, and lots of CAPE's partners that have put together a call to action, which we're going to send out again. And what this actually looks at is the ways that climate change can impact health of Canadians and why this matters to Canadians. So, for example, over the last decade, we've seen that Lyme disease cases have spiked. In Ontario, we know that the ticks that cause Lyme disease are heading north and spreading by almost 50 kilometers a year. There's also mosquitoes that spread diseases like Zika, and usually they can't handle cold winters in Canada. But for the first time a couple of years ago, those mosquitoes were found living in Canada. Wow. And I think, now that we're heading into the winter, it's a little bit hard to remember, but heat waves have already become dangerous in Canada, and they're going to get more common. So these are the things that we're hearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I spent, one of my home provinces is Nova Scotia, and I spent most of July there, and the amount of fear that people have of ticks and Lyme disease is out of control, and unlike anything I've ever seen in that province, having spent a lot of my life there. So I'm hearing you, things are definitely changing. You told us a little bit about the campaign that CAPE has been running. Can you share more about what CAPE is, how you work, and what you've been up to?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a long name. We're the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, but we have a broad base. There's thousands of people across the country who are health professionals. They might be doctors. There's also nurses, public health folks. And what we look at is the scientific and evidence basis for environment and health and how it influences our health. And we are able to spread that message, and we put it out in terms of more easily digestible forms. For example, we put out a very comprehensive toolkit earlier this year with lots of modules, and we put out handouts that really distills down the most important pieces of information. So what we do is we help people make that connection between environmental issues and how it's going to affect their health.
Gotcha. And yeah, as a member of Climate Action Network Canada, it's been really wonderful to follow CAPE's work over the years and to see that work growing and getting a lot of reach. Because I think something that I try to speak a lot about as the executive director of Climate Action Network Canada is, at this point in human history, taking action on climate change is really caring about people. If you care about people, and we all do, we all have friends and family that we love and care for, and want well-being, want to protect the well-being and health of, and so that actually necessitates us taking action on climate change. And that's a big part of the message I've been trying to bring into this election, that, caring is voting, and that voting for climate is really an act of love. And I wonder, if that resonates with what you've been hearing from healthcare professionals.
Absolutely. We hear that all the time. So I'll give you an example. We know that burning fossil fuels not only contributes to climate change, but also causes air pollution. And scientists at Health Canada believe that air pollution is a factor in over 7,000 deaths each year. But those aren't just statistics. Those are our friends and family and our neighbors. Those are actual people around us who are going to be affected. And it's also important that, when we walk around in the cities and towns and rural places that we live in, that we recognize that there are marginalized and disadvantaged people in Canada who are the ones who are going to feel climate change the hardest. And that includes people who are our neighbors and our family as well. So what we're hearing is that, climate change is a human issue because it does affect our health and it affects Canadians. And we know, for example, that Canada is heating up even more than the rest of the world is, more than the average. And so this is an issue of, not only is it an issue of fairness, where the people who have contributed least to climate change in Canada, who have protected the land, are also the most affected, but also that it can affect everyone in Canada because it can affect our health.
Thanks. That's really powerful. Okay, we're heading into this election. Climate change at the top of people's minds, healthcare also at the top of people's minds. We heard a little bit from Steph, what she feels is kind of on the line, what's at stake in election 2019. Let's hear about that from your perspective. Why do you think it's important for people to vote? What are you encouraging people to vote for? And how do you think that this election might kind of shape where we're headed next?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is the most important election that I can remember. It's pivotal for defining what happens in our window of opportunity for preventing the worst effects of healthcare. Scientists the world over, there's a consensus. They're telling us that the next decade is a critical time to define what we're doing, what our trajectory is going to be for protecting our environment. And beyond that, there might be a tipping point. So I think, if this is something that, isn't making a big difference for you, what I would say is, think about it in terms of how this will affect your kids. So do it for your kids who can't vote, and do it for your future self who will have to live in a world that needs to support you and your family. And I think if the values that we care most about as Canadians are health, that we should vote for the things that are going to protect them for the future. And that includes climate action as a very important part of it.
Thanks so much, Edward. That's really lovely. Maybe I'll keep you on for a minute and let's pull Eric in to be a part of this chat. Hey, Eric. So we're going to check in a little bit more about what Generation Squeeze is and what you've been up to, but maybe I can ask first for you to reflect on what Edward's been sharing and maybe a little bit of what Steph said when it comes to what's on the line with this election and the kind of interconnectedness of many of these issues that are weighing on people's minds.
Yeah, you bet. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Swanson. I'm an executive director with Generation Squeeze. And yeah, a lot to agree with both what Steph and Edward were saying. A mountain of issues, Steph put it. That's definitely it. Gen Squeeze works to speak up for Canadians in our 20s, 30s, and 40s. And so the big issues are the ones a lot of us are dealing with: housing affordability, family affordability, climate change, and this window of opportunity that Edward spoke to. All of these are coming together at once. And so it's extra important this election, as Steph said, for our parties and leaders to actually show us how they're going to deliver those results and actually solve these big problems. And so Gen Squeeze has been doing our best to dig through the party platforms on over 50 criteria to assess how well the parties are doing at solving those big goals, which you can check out at gensqueeze.ca. But yeah, this is one of the most important elections, of our lifetime, especially on climate change, where we have this shrinking window. And it's great that groups like Future Majority, Canadians across the country, are starting to exercise kind of this biggest voting bloc. Young people are the biggest voting bloc now for the first time in the history of Canada. Young people and all Canadians, this is a critical election.
So something I think that is really interesting about Gen Squeeze's engagement is often affordability and climate change are put on opposite ends of the spectrum politically, right? like you can't have an affordable life and take action on climate change is this story that we're told often. And I, being on the climate end of the spectrum, am often in media interviews or in public speaking engagements asked, well, how are we going to do all this in an affordable way? Oh, that all sounds great, but we still need to make sure that we're growing the economy and creating jobs. I'm curious how you guys square that. How do you talk about that?
Well, we can. We can do both. I mean, climate change is both an urgent threat and an amazing opportunity, economically. And there are ways we can design policy to make sure that people come out on top and we're all upgrading our lives through the process. Unfortunately, for some who, work to either don't believe that climate change is urgent or work to hold back action on it, they'll make the argument that acting will make life less affordable. But that's not accurate if you design policy well. And we know how to do it. That's what one of the things we can all be stoked by is we know how to do this. We can make life more affordable while solving climate change, while making family life more affordable. And, we definitely just need to see more action from the parties on this, but we can raise the revenue in fair ways to pay for those things. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we need to turn to our parties and our leaders for.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to take a moment to acknowledge that it seems like we've successfully cracked the Facebook Live nut, and we are streaming live to Facebook. So to all of you watching us on Facebook, welcome. We've been having a conversation about climate change as it connects to the other top of mind issues for Canadians heading into vote day on October 21st, 2019. So far we've had a chat with Steph Glansman from Future Majority, Dr. Edward Zia from Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and I'm right now chatting with Eric Swanson from Generation Squeeze. We're going to bring the other speakers in again before the hour is out, so fear not, you've not missed the chance to hear from those other two. And to give you a little bit of a recap, we've so far been having a conversation about the ways in which climate change interconnects with those other issues, so health, affordability, and what's at stake in this election. So why all of our organizations are doing everything we can to make sure that Canadians vote for climate action during this election, vote for health protection, vote for affordability, and how voting for all of those things can actually be something that you do all at once. So they're not necessarily opposed to one another. And we're also having a conversation about how, what kinds of information you can use to figure out how to suss through those party platforms and make the right choice when you head to the ballot box on Monday. Okay, so Eric, we were just chatting about this kind of false dichotomy that's often drawn between the economy and the environment, and how climate policies can actually be designed to both be affordable and to enhance overall affordability. So the two things that I often think are missing in that conversation are, number one, the cost of inaction. So how unaffordable is it for us to not take action on climate change? How much is inaction on climate change likely to actually worsen the challenges that people of many ages, but particularly folks in that generation squeeze are experiencing right now? So that's the first thing. And the other thing that I often think about is, well, what about the economic opportunities associated with taking action on climate change? Can we reframe this conversation of climate change being something that is expensive to actually being an opportunity to redesign an economy that works better for people and for the world? So maybe give me some thoughts on those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we don't solve climate change, if we don't manage to hold global warming as low as possible to, for example, 1.5 degrees, let's be clear, we're handing down the biggest debt in the history of humankind, to the next generation. It's extremely expensive not to act on this. And the good news is short-term action can produce short-term affordability increases for everybody. The big city mayors will be quick to point out that investments in transit can make housing more affordable, obviously drops commute costs, and times, time is also a cost. When we all switch to electric vehicles, we're going to be enjoying the lower cost of electricity as compared to, fossil fuel cars. It goes on and on and on. And, there are a bunch of groups, not on this particular Zoom, that are working on laying out the opportunity in terms of the clean economy. And we are starting to see some of the parties actually double down on that opportunity, perhaps which we can talk more about later. But the parties are trying to put Canada at the forefront of this transition.
Okay, well, before we bring the others in, let's chat a little bit about that, because I think it's probably true that Climate Action Network Canada, we can post some links on some of our work in the chat, and Generation Squeeze are the groups on the line that have been doing some kind of deep dive analyses into the platforms. Of course, we're all nonpartisan organizations, so this isn't about recommending what party to vote for and endorsing any candidates, but more about just, giving folks who are thinking this weekend about how they're going to cast their ballot a little bit of insight into how the parties are thinking about these issues. So what we've been finding is, yes, just as you mentioned, there is a strong link being made by several parties about on the connections between what is often referred to as a just transition. So ensuring that as we take action on climate change, we're also protecting workers and communities and pursuing those opportunities to generate jobs in a clean economy. So there are several parties that have been talking about that, and I found that really interesting. And I wonder if you're seeing the kind of level of courage that we need to see from political parties to move this this project of like reimagining Canadian prosperity and job creation forward.
Yeah, and we need to see courage and we need to see detail as well, right? Like we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, great point.
And so, you were mentioning there is like a bunch of good intel out there about where the parties stack up on climate, and they'll take different approaches, whether leaning on like who's got the most ambitious plan, the highest targets, the boldest, biggest moves, and who's got some more of that detail to actually prove that what they're promising can be made to happen, like over the next term. Both are important. But we definitely are starting to see a lot more just transition language as we transition to a clean economy, making sure that workers and communities that are dependent on them, those existing industries are protected and helped. And there's some gaps as well, but definitely a lot of progress as compared to last time around. And, just to go to the big, one of the wedge issues, the carbon tax, it's pretty cool that we've got 3 big parties, fully in support of it. Whereas even mention of the policy basically killed up, electoral chances not too long ago. So progress.
Definitely. I'm seeing that progress as well. Like both the fact that all major parties have felt the need to put forward climate platforms. So I think both of our organizations, if you go to our websites and links to this can be put in the chat on Facebook Live as well as here on the Zoom. So, we've kind of gone into more detail and done a little bit of thinking around the relative value of each of the commitments. But I think overall, safe to say, we've entered into a place where every party is expected to have a climate platform. And there are some big differences between those platforms for sure. So important to go and understand that. But from my perspective, I think what's at stake in this election is climate change no longer being thought of as a polarized and partisan issue in this country, which it really has been characterized as that polarizing issue in recent years. From my perspective, while climate change might be a political issue, it should not be a partisan one. So just as we do on healthcare, I think we need to understand that action on climate change is a Canadian value, and that we can differ on tactics, but we cannot differ on the need to take that action and the kind of scale that science requires of us on that front. I think it might be interesting to pull the other panelists in, unless, Eric, did you want to say anything more before we end our one-on-one chat?
No, let's
all right.
Bring the party bigger here. Edward
and Steph, join us. Hello again. Okay. All right. So for those of you on Facebook, we had some technical difficulties at the top of this conversation. So we moved to the Zoom and now we're back on Facebook. So really great. Thanks everyone for attending. And I'm really excited to see the conversation that is unfolding on Facebook once I am able to sign into that in the near future. So again, we have with us Steph from Future Majority, Edward from the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and Eric from Generation Squeeze. I wonder, Steph, Edward, do you have any thoughts to share on the conversation that Eric and I just had?
I think I really appreciate the comment around detail in these policies. I think young Canadians are looking beyond lip service. I think we really need to see like effective policy to actually get us to these places. I think politicians often can get caught in the trap of just like duping us with promises that they can't necessarily fulfill, but young Canadians are like looking for strong policy that has like an actual like effective rollout plan, to my comment before, so we can just see results.
I also really appreciated Eric's comment about specifics. You know, we've all seen that all the political parties agree that this is an issue, and then tackling it to different degrees is what separates them. You know, this is obviously a problem that to the scale of which we've talked about, we need to run rapidly towards addressing. So I think that's a really key step forward.
I think one question I have for Edward, another concern that we're hearing a lot on campuses across Canada are around the mental health crisis. And I would love to hear if you can draw some like parallels between mental health and the environment and this election.
Yeah, it's a really interesting you know, question, Steph. There's some science that's still developing around that. What we do know is that there is some evidence that associates or links mental health issues with heat waves or with air pollution. And also, you know, more obviously, we see that the people's growing concern about what's going to happen over the next century if we don't do enough to address climate change is quite worrying for our futures in terms of affordability, in terms of health, in terms of protecting our environment and the nature that we enjoy. So I think probably the best thing to say about this is it affects people in unique and different ways. But overall, it is actually impacting a lot of people across Canada who are concerned and seeing that not enough action is being taken. So that gap is making people feel anxious.
There's some comments rolling in from folks who've joined us. So from Helen Doyle, she says, it's great to hear a discussion about opportunities for climate action. The OPHA, which is the Ontario Public Health Association, and other health groups are promoting the health co-benefits of climate action, including improved air quality, healthier diets, increased physical activity, and improved health equity. Thanks, Helen. That's a really helpful and insightful comment, and I think reflects very well what we've been hearing from others on the line. I'm often reminded of this pretty famous cartoon that probably everyone's seen, where there's someone making a PowerPoint presentation and about climate change, and on the screen it says, you know, livable communities, more active transportation, less air pollution, and someone in the audience is raising their hand and saying, well, what if climate change is actually a big hoax and we make the world a better place for nothing? And that's a pretty strong message that I hope to convey to Canadians as we head to the polls on Monday, which is, you know, a vote for climate action is not just a vote to reduce emissions. It is a vote to make the communities that we live in healthier. It is a vote that asks politicians to get creative, to get detailed, to get real about the ways in which we're going to invest in a future economy that works for people and the planet. And you know, I think there are a lot of really emotional conversations around that economic transition that happen and can perhaps in some of their most kind of voracious articulations maybe dissuade people from being comfortable expressing that climate change is important to them, and that they really want to be voting for political parties and leaders that are taking that issue seriously. So I'm going to just turn to each of you and ask for some inspiring words, for some motivating words that can help those folks who are maybe feeling disenfranchised, who are feeling a little undermotivated, who think they might not even show up on Monday. What do you have to say to those folks? And let's go to Eric first.
Sure. Well, there's always a ton of good reasons to vote. I mean, you can be voting because you really respect your local candidate. You can be voting because you're stoked about the leader of a party. You can be voting because you generally align with the party's values, or, you know, you can be really looking for those results and details and want to see parties solve the big problems, since you'll maybe be diving into platforms. We've got a ton of resources at gensqueeze.ca on that. But, you know, on climate change, you know, you can kind of get trapped in, motivating. One of the motivating things is that if you combine all of the parties' platforms together, you come away thinking, oh, you know, like actually, if we just threw this all into a pot, we start getting pretty close, you know, to the bundle of policies that we need to address this problem and to upgrade our lives and to make life more affordable at the same time. So, you know, after the vote, let's hope for some collaboration in some form or another in any kind of government to take the best ideas from everyone and charge forward.
Great. Eric. Steph, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think speaking towards my generation specifically, we have, and we've been saying this throughout the whole call, but we truly have so much at stake this election. And it's like the first time in Canadian history where we can actually start to flex power. Like I said before, politicians haven't been working for us. And I really believe that this is our opportunity to change the political dial, to make these issues around affordability, around climate change, around job security, more highlighted across all parties. We know, you mentioned it before, Kat, climate change is no longer a partisan issue. And I think that that can stand for so many other issues at stake this election. So for young people to stay at home, it's really like giving up action on these issues that are so real to our livability moving forward.
Mm-hmm. That's real. Edward, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's also really important to vote because putting what you care about most, putting your principles and values down on paper also affirms it for yourself. You know, it lets yourself know and the other people that you know that this is what you truly care about. And voting in that way is a way to say that your voice matters. And no matter who forms our next government, you can say that you stuck by your values and hold the government accountable. You know, no matter if it's someone that you voted for or you didn't. This is, you know, this is what you believed in.
Well said, everyone. Yeah, I might just add that I think, you know, we had some promises for electoral reform during the last election, and so far we haven't seen that take place in Canada, and maybe that's a fight for another day. And I think, you know, the fact that we have an electoral system that can feel a little out of touch with the ways that that people want to express their concerns, that people and people can often feel like, you know, what they care about is not ultimately reflected in election results. But the reality is, given the electoral system that we have in Canada, choosing not to vote in and of itself is a political choice. And I think it's important for us to just all be aware of that, that choosing not to vote is not an effective way of, you know, maybe expressing your dissatisfaction with the political system. If you're dissatisfied with the political system, I feel like you probably have a lot of reasons for that. And the best way to express those reasons is to actually get out there, vote, and then take the action that needs to be taken to change that political system so that it better reflects you and what you care about. so yeah, so I think it's important to get that message out, and that's something that's been really well framed in a recent blog post from Faith and the Common Good. And speaking of that resource, there have been some really amazing resources posted in the chat. So we've heard about govotecanada.ca, which has an analysis of where parties stand on a variety of issues, and provides a nonpartisan voter tool to help folks figure out who they want to cast their ballot for. You've heard that we at Climate Action Network Canada have a blog post that pulls together all of the analyses that various parties have done on climate, whether it's climate platforms or the ways in which Canada needs to move forward on climate change. We also, in June, released our paper, Getting Real About Canada's Climate Plan, which takes stock of where we are right now when it comes to climate action in Canada and lays out the kind of 7 core principles for any meaningful climate plan for this country. So you can see that on climateactionnetwork.ca. Generation Squeeze has done some really amazing detailed analysis of party platforms across 4 different issue areas that we heard from Eric. So you can see that on their website, and posts or links to that website have been posted in the chat as well. Future Majority has some amazing tools to get folks voting and to reach into particularly those younger communities, 18 to 24. So do check those out if you're a younger person and you're like, I'm definitely going to vote, but I need to figure out how to encourage my friends and colleagues to do the same thing. So Future Majority's got that for you. And CAPE has done some incredible work pulling together those healthcare professionals and those communities of care. And they have some really powerful pieces that help to draw those connections. And I think give all of us the power to speak about the ways in which caring for ourselves, each other, and caring for the world all have to happen at the same time, and our political choices that we have to make for ourselves and for our communities. So we have some great links going out on the chat. Please pay attention to those. We only have a few more minutes left together. We're going to put these recordings up and make those available for folks to watch later. But in our last 4 minutes, let's talk a little bit about hope. We hear about hope pretty regularly when it comes to some of the biggest challenges that we're facing today, whether it's climate change or a variety of other social challenges. I want to hear from each of you in the next 3 minutes, not just what gives you hope, but how you use that hope. So now that, like, if there's something that makes you feel hopeful, what does that then motivate you to go do? And how can that perhaps motivate others? And let's go in the opposite direction than last time. So I'm going to start with Edward.
Sure. So, what's making me hopeful is that we've seen lots of wins and lots of successes. So, what I'm really inspired by is that Canadians and health professionals across the country are united in the message that climate change is a crisis, that we need to do something about it during this election, and we need to do more, much more to act on it. And that includes the Canadian Medical Association, Canadian Nurses Association, other major groups that represent over 300,000 health professionals across the country are united in calling for action. So that is truly motivating for me to go out and tell my friends and encourage my family to vote on Monday. This is the most important thing that we can do, and without it, we're not going to have a voice. So I guess this whole weekend I'm going to spend motivating people to go out there and vote on Monday, if they haven't done it already.
Great. Steph?
Yeah, I think what makes me so hopeful is seeing the numbers of folks who have already cast their ballot. We've seen a 25% increase of advanced polls, turn out to those, as well as we've seen it nearly double on-campus polling for young voters to turn out to them, which is incredible. It's last federal election, there's around 40,000 70,000 students who went out to vote. And then this year we see that it's 111,000. So that is like incredible to see. It gives me a lot of hope that people are really taking initiative for their futures, which also feeds me into how this hope is propelling us forward. We have one day to go. Election day is on Monday, and for folks who weren't able to use advanced polls and the on-campus polling stations, really getting out there and having their voices heard is incredibly important.
Thanks, Steph. I hadn't heard those numbers. That also makes me feel hopeful. That's great. Eric.
Yeah, I mean, and not to get too overly philosophical about this, but like, depending on what kind of person you are, like hope, fear, pessimism, optimism, like those conversations can be a bit of a trap. You know, you see reports come out highlighting the urgency, and it's like, uh-oh, you know, like, are we gonna make it? So as far as motivation goes, I find that in action. And so there's a ton of stuff we can individually do as communities and with our families, do with our businesses and organizations, and do with our political leaders and parties to charge forward and solve these problems. And so voting is an amazing act that we can all take. And like Edward, I'm going to be hustling to make sure at least my own peer network is out to the polls on Monday. And elections are just one. Like they come and go, and they're super important. And the work carries on Tuesday to make sure that the mandate letters of the next government, you know, any agreements that may or may not be formed, you know, reflect the urgency. And so we just keep acting, and we can do that in hopeful ways and motivating ways, and keep the stoke alive.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'm happy to hear that all of us are going to be whipping that vote over the course of the weekend. There are some really great visuals that you can use on social media. So I'm going to vote climate on October 21st in both French and English. If you search for your Facebook profile pic frames, search for hashtag vote climate. And I'm gonna pick up on something that Eric said, which is like voting is so critical, but it is also just the first step. The other thing that we are going to be encouraging our members and our members' to do over the course of the next weeks and months and years is to meet with your elected officials of every political stripe and tell them these issues matter to you and you're expecting them and their party to take them seriously and take action on them. They're only going to respond if they hear that request coming from their constituency. So get out there, talk to your elected officials, understand that the power is really in your hands, and go vote on Monday. Thanks so much to everyone that joined us, and I appreciate all your patience in working through our technical difficulties. Thank you so much to Eric, Steph, and Edward. So lovely to speak with all of you, and great work in all of your organizations. Please check out the links and the work of other great organizations in the chat. And we will be seeing you soon, I hope. Good luck with your watch parties Monday night. And yeah, thanks to everyone who helped us pull this event together in the background as well. Bye, everyone.